Ready for nutritious food at affordable prices? Then head on over to Grape.
Good morning. Finally getting around to actually finishing off this Duskmourn set review. We've only got artifacts, lands, and the commander cards to get through, so that shouldn't take us too long. So once we've done that, we'll go and load up my first draft of Duskmourn. Appreciate me, please. I have been trying very, very hard to resist the urge to draft it already, so that you get to come along with me on my first attempt at actually drafting the format. Hi, welcome. I'm running commentary. I've got a treadmill. I run on the treadmill while I play the games and try and remember to talk about it. 3 levels of multitasking doesn't always work out. Show up in the chat. Heckle me if I look like I'm slacking off on any of those things. Mondays are Monday Morning Magic. Magic the Gathering is my longtime favourite game in basically every way, and I dedicate a slot every week to playing that on stream. Wednesdays are my well-worn Wednesdays. I play a game until it is completely worn out. We have just started the Hades 2 early access, and we'll be continuing that this week, and we're just going to play that until we have exhausted everything the early access has to offer, or they release a major update and we have more stuff to do. And then Fridays is First Time Fridays. I take a game that I've never played before and just have a go at it and see how I feel about it. I'll play that for a month or two of Fridays and to get a feel for it, and then decide whether or not it's going well enough on stream that we will shift it to be considered for a well-worn Wednesday, or if we just go, this isn't really vibing for us, we'll ditch that. Maybe I'll finish it in my own time and we'll pick a new game. We just wrapped up with First Time Fridays of Pokemon Reborn, so if you've got something that you would like to consider watching me play, let me know on Twitch, X, YouTube, wherever you see this. Okay, I think that's just about everything that needs saying there. So, that's working, and that's working. Right. Let's get this show on the road. I need to turn down the background music a bit. Let me know if it's too loud on your end as well. The first artifact in Duskmourn. Attack in the box. Great joke. Pop goes the evil. very mediocre card. 3 mana for a 2/4. Whenever it attacks, you may have it get +4/+0 until end of turn. If you do, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So, it can attack as a 2/4 indefinitely, but one time it can be a 6/4 and then dies at the end step if it didn't already. If you're doing some really weird artifact recursion stuff, then maybe you can find a home for this. It's an artifact that sacrifices itself, and a 3 mana that attacks for 6 isn't anything to sneer at if you can do it over and over. If you've got something like Ishin, where you can double that trigger and have it attack as a 10/4, maybe you're interested. Generally, this is not great, and I would not recommend playing it. Why am I going that fast? Oh, that's okay. This is a reasonable speed. Just warming up. Sorry. Brain, come on. Right. Bear Trap. It's a 1 mana artifact with flash. Pay 3, sack it, 3 damage to target creature. Every time its teeth tasted blood, its hunger grew, until one day it was no longer a trap, but a hunter. Let's see. 1 mana flash artifact is pretty good in just for triggering off random artifact synergies. 3 mana and sack it for 3 damage isn't a great rate, but is certainly better than some other things we've seen. This is effectively 4 mana, deal 3 damage to something as an in colorless and at instant speed. Not an amazing card, but certainly not unplayable if you're doing artifact shenanigans. Conductive Machete. 4 mana, artifact equipment. When it enters, manifest dread, then attach Conductive Machete to that creature. Equipped creature gets +2/+1 and equips for 4. So, it's a 4 mana card that comes in as a 4/3. It gives you some card advantage, and then you can move it around for 4 mana. If you can take advantage of repeatedly manifesting dread, you may be interested. A 4 mana equipment that equips for 4 +2/+1 is really not good enough for Voltron strategies, which is the only or equipment strategies. Trying to run through that. Like, even if you're free equipping this, 4 mana for +2/+1 is just not a great rate. So, if you can blink it, or you desperately want more manifest dreads, this is worth considering, but I have a blink deck, this isn't making the cut there. Dissection Tools. This one is much more interesting. It's a 5 mana artifact equipment. When it enters, manifest dread, then attach Dissection Tools to that creature. But Mr. Running Commentary, why is this better? You said the last one was bad at 4 mana, and this one is 5. Well, this one gives the equipped creature +2/+2, Death Touch, Lifelink, and equip cost sacrifice a creature. This is a 5 mana free sacrifice output that also brings a creature with it, and sometimes giving something +2/+2 Death Touch and Lifelink is useful. The main thing that you care about with this a lot of the time is just going to be, hey, I can sacrifice creatures without having to spend resources. If you're into sacrifice decks, you understand just how ridiculous this is, and if you're not, well, I can't remember which pro said it. At least one professional Magic player has said that sacrificing creatures for free is the most powerful thing you can do in Magic. I may be somewhat skeptical of that, but hey, they're the ones that have made hundreds of thousands of dollars playing this game, and I haven't, so this card I'm very excited to have put into a couple of decks, actually. Include just a free sacrifice outlook, great fun. +2/+2 Death Touch and Lifelink is really powerful on an attacker or a blocker. Manifest Dread is its own card advantage, and it's just creepy. Onwards. Found footage. 1 mana artifact clue. You may look at face down creatures your opponents control anytime. And 2, sacrifice it, surveil 2, then draw a card. If you've got someone who really loves playing Morph deck, then maybe this is an entertaining thing to put into, but generally this is below the rate that you're really looking for, unless you're in a really grindy artifact exit style recursion deck where you just want as many artifacts that you can sacrifice for some sort of advantage as you can get your hands on. 3 mana, surveil 2, draw a card is not amazing. The fact that you can split it over several turns is kind of nice, but there's not much more to say about that one. Friendly Teddy. It's 2 mana for an artifact creature bear toy. It is a 2/2, and when Friendly Teddy dies, each player draws a card. Best friends are great to share secrets with, like where the matches are, or how to find a human heart. If you're in group hug, hey look, it's another group hug friend. There may be some line where you can set up, maybe with something like Krark Clan Ironworks, where you can set up infinitely sacrificing this and replaying it, and then shuffle your deck back in some way and just deck all of your opponents. That would be kind of entertaining. Like, requires a lot of moving pieces to make it work, but each player draws a card, has the potential to do dumb things if you can set us up. Ghost Vacuum. 1 mana artifact, tap, exile target card from a graveyard, and for 6, tap and sacrifice this. Put each creature card exiled with Ghost Vacuum onto the battlefield under your control with a flying counter. It's a 1/1 spirit in addition to its other types, activate only as a sorcery. So, 1 mana tap graveyard hate is something we've seen from time to time. It continues to be pretty useful. If you're playing against... It's important to note this doesn't only exile creatures, this exiles anything, and the exile clause isn't limited to sorcery speed, so you can snipe something your opponent's targeting. If you play against quite a few graveyard decks, this is a pretty strong thing to do. And then don't expect this to survive in long enough for you to be able to pull off the 6 mana effect. That's just an exciting bonus. The main thing you're doing is playing this as 1 mana recurring graveyard hate that eventually makes your opponents feel very threatened just by its existence. Because the later you get into the game, the more resources you've got under it, and the more of a threat that 6 mana activation becomes, until your opponents eventually have to spend probably good resources on getting rid of it, instead of doing anything else. Glimmerlight. 2 mana, when it enters, create a 1/1 white glimmer enchantment creature token. Equip creature, yes, +1/+1, equip for 1. If this came in attached to the Glimmer, I think it would be pretty decent. It's a 2 mana artifact that gives you an artifact and an enchantment, and gives you a small boost. If you're doing something like the Neon Kamigawa deck that just really wanted artifacts and enchantments in play, this is a great way to trigger it. It is fine, but not particularly exciting. This card is very funny. It is a fairly middling mana rock. It's very restricted in that it can only be played in a 5-color deck because of the way that the Commander color rules work. Haunted Screen. 3 mana for an artifact. tap, add white or black, or tap, pay 1 life, add green, blue or red, and 7 mana, put 7+1/+1 counters on Haunted screen, it becomes a 0/0 spirit creature in addition to its other types, activate only once. So, we've got a black and white TV. If you pay, you can upgrade it to a colour TV, and eventually it becomes a big old ghost. If you're in the market for 3-colour mana rocks, this is 3-colour, 5-colour mana rocks, that's what I was not saying, not 3-colour. If you're in the market for 3-mana mana rocks that can produce 5 colours, this one, the upside on this of being able to make it a 7/7 is interesting, but the downside of paying life can add up over the course of a game. It's fine, it's probably better than something like a Manolith, it's probably worse than some of the other options that are available, but pros and cons. Keys to the house. 1 mana, artifact, 1 and tap, sacrifice, search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it into your hand and shuffle. We've seen this effect on artifacts time and time again. Or 3 and tap, sacrifice it, look or unlock a door of target room you control, activate only as a sorcery. If that second ability didn't sacrifice, I would be in love with this card. As it is, a one-time rebuy is clunkier than I'm really looking for in the format it is. If you find them, they wanted to be found. If you're desperate for a preponderance of these Wayfarer Bauble style effects, where you pay a couple of mana for an artifact that digs you up a land, here's another one. The second line of rules text is almost never going to come up unless you're in a dedicated rooms deck, and even there, it's fine, but will take quite a bit of work to actually make really effective. Malevolent Chandelier. 6 mana for a 4/4 artifact creature construct with flying, and 2 mana, put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library, activate only as a sorcery. So, we've got yet another card to pair up with Grenzo, where you mill yourself, put something good from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, and then use Grenzo's ability to put it from your library onto the battlefield. We've seen piles of this effect by now. This is just another one. Doesn't have to tap, is fairly nice. Being a big flyer is fairly nice. The most significant bit about this is that this one can target your opponent's graveyard, so this is also a graveyard hate piece. But activate only as a sorcery is a pretty major downside for doing graveyard hating. If you see a light moving towards you in the darkness, don't assume it's coming to help. If you are taking advantage out of putting things on the bottom of your library with something like Grenzo, as we said, or River Song, then maybe you want this, and then we'll be able to just get a bit of extra utilization sometimes out of hating your opponent's graveyard, but it's not a particularly good rate. Marvin, the Murderous Mimic. 2 mana for a legendary artifact creature toy. Marvin is a 2/2 who has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. In a moment of bloodthirsty whimsy, a Razorkin once picked up a ventriloquist puppet and used it to terrorize a survivor. Now it hunts on its own, with no one pulling its strings. So, Marvin. Let's get the easy one out of the way. Pilipala. And then, so, if Pilipala's in play, Marvin can pay 2 mana to untap himself. well, you have, can't remember what the name of the mirror is. Atwood. That's the one that I'm thinking of. No. That one. If you've got Palladium Mare and Pillipala, Marvin has tap, add 2 colourless, pay 2 colourless, untap him, add 1 colourless of any mana. You have infinite mana in a colourless deck. So that's the sort of shenanigans you're looking to do if Marvin is your commander. But I think he's more interesting in the 99, where you can surround him with other useful activated abilities. Something I'm quite excited and interested to do is pair him up with something like Tree of Perdition, where Marvin gets the tap, exchange target opponent's life total with Tree of Perdition's toughness, except it becomes Marvin's toughness. So turn 2 you play Marvin, turn 4 you play Tree of Perdition, you tap Marvin, target opponent's life total becomes 2, and Marvin's toughness becomes whatever their life total was. Bam! Or another interesting one is with something like IRF, who lets you untap 2 other target legendary creatures. So Marvin, IRF, and another legend with an interesting tap ability. You tap IRF. You untap Marvin and the other legend. You tap the legend. You tap Marvin using the untap 2 other legendary creatures. You untap the legend and IRF. Bam! Infinite untaps of your thing with an interesting tap ability. Maybe something like Sisay. Yes, I'm aware that we're talking 3 or 4 colours here, but I think Marvin, the more colours you're playing, the more powerful Marvin has the potential to be. I don't think he's great as a commander, but I think he will find exciting homes in lots of 99s, especially those built around creature combos. So, 2 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may sacrifice a permanent other than that creature or saw if you do draw a card, and equip for 2. 2 mana +2/+0 and conditional card draw is absolutely fine if you're in a deck that's producing enough extra resources to pay for it. Something like Shagrat Loot Bearer, who, whenever he attacks, amasses an army, so you can just immediately make an army, then sacrifice it to draw a card if that's what you need. Right, onto our lands. So we have this cycle of, this one's going to be pretty quick, we've got this interesting cycle of lands that enter tapped unless a player has 13 or less life. Unless you are playing a really efficient self-destruction deck like Rowan Sign of War, where you're really desperately smashing your life total down, these lands are bad. I would not recommend playing them. It's basically not worth the tracking time and effort to work out whether or not they're coming in untapped. And then there's one of these lands for every colour pair, if I remember. And then other cycle of lands we have are these Verges, which come in untapped and produce 1 colour of mana, and then add the second colour only if you control a basic land type of the relevant pair. So Blazemire Verge is a land that taps to add for black and can add for red only if you control a swamp or a mountain. These are more interesting. I think you need to be in a deck that meets 2 criteria. 1, desperately wants untapped mana, and 2, does not. The secondary colour is significantly less important than the primary one. So in the case of Blazemire Verge, if you're on a deck that desperately wants untapped black mana and eventually later in the game wants red, then these are good lands. If you want to reliably have both colours of mana early, these are quite risky lands to include in your deck because they require the rest of your mana base to pull together to allow them to produce both. And of note with these Verges, I believe there's only 5 of them in this set. So there's black, red if you control swamp or mountain, add white or blue if you control a plains or island, add blue or black if you control island swamp, add green, white only if you have a forest or plains. Just quickly skim through to make sure there's not anything that I'm forgetting about. And Terramorphic Expanse we've seen before. There we go. Thornspire Verge. Add red or green if you control a mountain or forest. Oh, Valgavoth. There was a land I forgot, and it's an interesting and exciting one. Valgavoth's Lair is an enchantment land. It has hexproof, it enters tapped, and when it enters you choose a colour. It can tap to add 1 mana of the chosen colour. If you are interested, if you know how powerful artifact lands are, behold, we have an enchantment land, here to do all of the dumb shenanigans that you need from your enchantments. That's about it. If you're playing an Enchantress deck, you probably want to try and get a copy of this. Important to note, a lot of the old Enchantress creatures care about when you cast an enchantment. This will not trigger those. This will only trigger the more modern things with the effects like Constellation or Eerie. But still, it's a land that gives you colour flexibility, it's hard for your opponents to get rid of, and triggers a pile of enchantment effects. And also just anything that goes, count how many enchantments you have. Important to note, it does make you vulnerable to sweepers like Farewell that will get rid of all enchantments, in the same way that the artifact lands were vulnerable then to mass artifact removal. Okie dokie. That's all of those. Onwards to the commander sets. Let's start with Aminatu Veil Piercer. 1 white, blue, black for a legendary human wizard. She's a 2/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 2. Each enchantment card in your hand has Miracle. Its Miracle cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 4. You may cast a card for its Miracle cost when you draw it if it's the first card you drew this turn. So, during each player's turn, the first card you draw, you look at. If it is an enchantment, it has Aminatu gives it Miracle, and you may cast it right then for its Miracle cost, which is the mana value of that card minus 4 generic. And also, Aminatu, with her surveilling ability, lets you manipulate the top of your library to make it more likely that you'll draw an enchantment to Miracle it. She is a fascinating little card, a very different approach to playing enchantments. I think what you really want is to be setting up so that you can reliably draw a card during each opponent's turn, so that you could have more chances to Miracle, because drawing a pile of cards in your own... She's asking for a very different style of play to a lot of Enchantress decks, because a lot of Enchantress decks are trying to hit a sort of threshold of card draw engines, so that every spell you're playing you're getting multiple cards, because that's what a lot of the Enchantress effects are looking to do. Aminatu is not looking for you to get additional card draws off your enchantments, because that doesn't synergize with her miracle ability. She's looking for you to set up a way where you are drawing extra cards during your opponent's turns off of something like trouble in pairs. Let's switch this one to that one. Something like trouble in pairs. Yes, okay. Which gives you ways to draw cards off of your opponent's doing things, so that you have opportunities to cast your enchantments during an opponent's turn and just keep miracling after miracling after miracling. Okay. Next card. Cayenne. Corrupted Memory. 2 green-blue for a 2/2 illusion. Legendary creature. As long as Cayenne's power is even, you may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. As long as Cayenne's power is odd, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Cayenne. Such a weird combination of abilities, where you're trying to balance and sequence how you put counters on her to set up and enable what's in your hand. You're really going to want cards that let you manipulate the number of counters on her at instant speed to mess around with your opponent's expectations. It's really hard to tell how powerful she is, although just getting +1/+1 every time you draw a card means that even without giving your stuff flash, she has the potential to just become enormous very quickly. Blue-green is noted for being very good at drawing cards when it wants to. And then you just get to sit there threatening your opponents with whatever you've got in hand and whatever untapped mana you've got, because anything in your hand could have flash, and your opponents have to try and plan around how big she is, and whether that means what's in your hand could be a giant spell or removal effect that has flash, or just a big old creature that will come down and mess up their attacks. She's going to be, I think, incredibly difficult to play, but an incredibly fun challenge if you enjoy that style of mind gaming. The Lord of Pain. 3 black-red for a 5/5 legendary creature human assassin. It has menace. Your opponents can't gain life. And whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, choose another target player. The Lord of Pain deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. This is a really great brute slug style commander, just constantly making your opponents suffer. If you can give this guy lifelink, you have the potential to gain enormous amounts of life from all of this interaction. You're looking for ways to force your opponents to cast spells in each other's turns. I'm struggling to think of. I feel like there's a red enchantment with text. It's also worth noting that your opponents take damage, but this triggers whenever a player casts their first spell. So if you can cast a spell every turn, you add that spell's mana value and damage to every cast. Certainly some interesting effects in here, but none of the one. am I thinking of? Maybe the effect that I'm thinking of doesn't actually exist. Ah, no. Sorry, just trying to. Well, the Ruinous Powers certainly worked well with what the Lord of Pain's doing, but the card that I thought I was thinking of does not seem to exist. Really, your opponent's going to be trying to play spells all the time anyway. All you have to do is just sit there and let them, and play some ways to keep the Lord of Pain from staying off the battlefield for too long, and encouraging your opponent to anything. Like, you're in black and red, so all of your damage doublers and life loss doublers are interesting things. Any big X spells that you can cast just to slug people for huge amounts. Lord of Pain, going to be very unpleasant to play against. If you see it on the battlefield, I recommend you get it off the battlefield as soon as possible. Moving on. The Master of Keys. X, white, blue, black. For a legendary enchantment creature horror, it is a 3/3 with flying. When it enters, put X +1/+1 counters on it and mill twice X cards. So, if X is 2, it comes in as a 5/5 and you mill 4 cards. Each enchantment card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. So, you play the Master of Keys, you mill yourself a chunk, and then you just get to start recasting enchantments from your graveyard while exiling the cards that you didn't care about. An interesting and quite powerful combo enabler. I don't know how good it is in a dedicated Enchantress deck, because you're more likely to want replenish style effects that just get everything back in one go. Try that one replenished. But you are, of course, to build the Master of Keys without particularly intending to take advantage of the escape cost, like replenish it in the right colours, and just use it to fill your graveyard to set up the mass recursion effects that you're considering. And of course, it's just a big flying commander, which always have the potential to be scary. If you're interested in filling your graveyard in Esper, if you're interested in being able to rebuy the best cards in your graveyard, Master of Keys is a great way to do that. Rendmore, Creaking Nest. 3 black-green for a legendary artifact creature Scarecrow. It's a 5/5 with Menace and Reach. And when it enters, and whenever you play a card with 2 or more card types, when it enters, and whenever you play a card with 2 or more card types, each player creates a tapped 2/2 Blackbird creature token with flying. The tokens are goaded for the rest of the game, which means they have to attack and can't attack you. So, what you're looking to do with this is play a deck filled with artifact creatures, enchantment creatures, artifact enchantments, whenever you play. So your artifact lands and enchantment lands will trigger this. You're looking to just fill your deck with as many of these sort of cards with multiple card types, and then you don't need to do a huge amount. You can just sit back and watch as your opponents flail at each other with this huge legion of 2/2 birds that have to keep swinging around. Yeah, and yes, a lot of your opponents are probably just going to trade them off, but it's a very interesting way to encourage your opponents to be more aggressive towards each other. When I first read this, I was very excited. I have a Thantis the Warweaver deck that's built around giving my opponent's creatures, forcing them to attack. And I was looking at this and realised that the way I built the deck, I think I had one card in the whole deck that could trigger Rendmore other than Rendmore. So not really making the cut there, which is quite disappointing. But if you're building around him as your commander, or putting him into the 99 and intentionally setting up your deck to take advantage of him, he has the potential to really mess up people's combats. Enjoy the big old bird bringer. Also, can we just appreciate that you're making 2/2 black birds? So, crows. He's a scarecrow. The crows can't attack you. Who controls the scarecrow? The crows are all attacking other places. Great flavour. Great design. I really like him, and I'm really quite sad that the deck that I wanted to put him in just isn't set up to include him. Onwards. Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls. 2 black-red for a legendary creature, Elder Demon, who is a 4/4 with flying and ward pay 2 life. Whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth and draw a card. Really powerful card advantage engine. If you are familiar with things like Nekusar and all of his ilk of Punisher effects, this Valgavoth is a great include in that style of play, or a great commander in his own right. Ward pay 2 life is not a huge cost, but combined with his ability does mean that if your opponents want to single target removal him, they are guaranteed to give you a card in exchange. 4 mana 4/4 that gets bigger constantly is quite scary. A huge stream of card advantage means that your opponents have to be quite cautious about how they play the game. Even small things like just now suddenly your opponent's fetch lands are giving you cards and +1/+1 counters. Even without you taking actions, there are ways to do it. Honestly, he might be one of the more interesting ways to build a burn commander, because you just fill your hand with instant speed ways to hit your opponents for damage and just go, your turn, lightning bolt you, you've lost life, put a counter on Valgavoth and draw a card to replace the bolt I just spent. Next opponent turn, lightning strike you, draw a card, and just rip through your deck while burning out your opponents. Could be fun, definitely interesting. I think there's going to be quite a few different ways to build Valgavoth, and I think they are all going to be quite unpleasant, just because he's such a powerful source of card advantage, which means that as long as Valgavoth is on the battlefield, its player is unlikely to ever run out of things to do. Onwards. Winter, Cynical Opportunist. 2 black-green for a legendary human warlock. Winter is a 2/5 with Death Touch. Whenever Winter attacks, mill 3 cards. At the beginning, if you have Delirium, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them, and if you do, put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter. So, he attacks, you mill 3. At your end step, if you have at least 4 card types in your graveyard, you can exile any number of cards as long as it includes at least 4 card types, and then you get to put one of those onto the battlefield. So if you end step exile an enchantment, an artifact, creature, and a land, you can put one of those cards onto the battlefield. Has the potential to be a powerful reanimate style commander, but requires some very specific deck building in order to reliably maintain Delirium. The fact that he has his own built-in mill effect is useful, but I think is going to generally be a tier down from other great recursion style decks like Merrin or the Sultai Sidisi. Although Winter is certainly an excellent include in either of those decks if they're set up for to keep the Delirium's train running. And final face commander, Zimone Mystery Unraveler. 2 green/blue. For a legendary human wizard, Zimone is a 3/3 with landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, manifest dread if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. Otherwise, you may turn a permanent you control face up. So, first land you play each turn gives manifest dread for you, and then every other land drop you make lets you flip that card face up. More blue-green landfall power nonsense shenanigans. Is she going? Honestly, I think she's very comparable to someone like Tachova. Being 4 mana is a pretty significant increase, and Manifest Dread, while not drawing you cards, is putting things directly onto the battlefield. Zimone is going to be an excellent blue-green big stuff commander, especially if you can fill your deck with big cards like Burgeoning, which let you and Explore. And all of the fetch land, Evolving Wild, Terramorph, just anything, every land that lets you play multiple lands at once you want in Zimone. Burgeoning, that lets you play lands in your opponent's turns to get additional mana effects you want. I think Zimone has the potential to be very scary. An important thing to note: things that are turned face up do not enter the battlefield, so if you're flipping up your big things, they do not trigger any enter the battlefield effects they may have. So if you're planning to build her where you're just cheating big things into play through her ability, you need to remember to account for the fact that your big effects need to be big effects on the battlefield, not big effects entering the battlefield. Onwards. And now just to rip our way through all of the rest of the cards that are going on in the command. All the rest of the new cards. Redress Fate. 6 white sorcery with Miracle for 3 and a white. Return all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is a lot more expensive than Replenish or I need to reset the trigger. Don't care about that. Don't care about that. Something. Searching the text, not the name. Come on, man, wake up. Something like Open the Vault, which is 6 mana. This one does give your opponents back all their things, which Redress Fate doesn't. If you can reliably Miracle this card is very, very strong. If you can't reliably Miracle this card is probably too expensive to utilize. Onwards. Secret Arcade. Non-land permanents you control and permanent spells you control are enchantments in addition to their other types. And the Duck, which is a 4 and a white enchantment room, and Dusty Parlor is 2 and a white room. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to that spell's mana value on up to 1 target creature. So, first half of the room, all of your spells are now enchantments. Second half of the room, whenever you cast an enchantment, you get to put a pile of counters on one of your creatures. If you're playing a load of enchantment synergies, this is a very powerful card. If you're not, this is almost entirely worthless unless you're happy to spend 8 mana to put +1/+1 counters on creatures you control when you cast your spells. Soaring Lightbringer. 4 and a white for a 4/5 enchantment bird glimmer. It has flying. Other enchantment creatures you control have flying. And whenever you attack a player, create a 1/1 white glimmer enchantment creature token that's tapped and attacking that player. So, 5 mana 4/5 flyer, very reasonable. It's an enchantment creature itself, so triggers any enchantment effects you have going on. Very nice. Gives any other enchantment creatures you control flying, which enables more aggression from you. Excellent. And gives you a 1/1 white glimmer enchantment creature, tapped and attacking for each player you attack. Excellent. If you've got attack triggers, this is great. If you've got enchantress triggers, this is great. The only downside is being able to reliably attack multiple people to get all of the advantage out of it, and the fact that what you're churning out are only 1/1s, which are tapped and attacking. This is not a defensive card. This requires you to be aggressive. If you are playing an aggressive enchantment deck, then this is for you. If you're not looking to be aggressive, then this may not be a card that you want. It is certainly powerful, but it is asking you to adjust your game plan to most effectively enable it. Fear of Sleep Paralysis. 5 and a blue for an enchantment creature Nightmare. It's a 6/6 with flying, and whenever Fear of Sleep Paralysis or another enchantment creature you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it, and it says, stun counters can't be removed from permanents your opponents control. So, what does this do? Over the course of several turns, as you play more and more enchantments, it just locks down every creature on the battlefield until your opponents can get rid of this. Because you only need to put 1 stun counter on something, and then it is stuck, it's tapped forever until this is removed. It is a very powerful defensive creature, and is also just a 6/6 flyer, so once you've locked down the things that can block it, you can just start smashing in while continuing to play out more enchantments and lock down even more threats. This card I am very excited to put into my enchantment deck, and very scared of how my opponents are going to respond once they realise exactly how miserable this is. This, I think, is a very kill-on-sight card. Glitch Interpreter. 2 and a blue for a human wizard. When it enters, if you control no face-down permanents, return Glitch Interpreter to its owner's hand and manifest Dread. And whenever 1 or more colourless creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So, 3 mana, manifest Dread, and then 3 mana, your manifested creatures and artifact creatures draw you cards. It is very, unless this requires you to be quite heavily into face down creatures for it to be really effective, because otherwise it's quite difficult to get it onto the battlefield and staying there. If you can get it to stay, it is going to make you a lot of card advantage if you can keep getting through. The downside, of course, is that what you're trying to get through with are 2/2s with no evasion and no protection. It's an interesting card, but I think that making the Glitch Interpreter work is going to require a lot of effort. Unlike They Came from the Pipes. 4 blue enchantment When it enters, manifest Dread twice, and whenever a face-down creature you control enters, draw a card. So, 5 mana, get 2 2/2s, draw 2 cards. Great rate. If you can blink with this, then it's incredible. The only reason that I'm not running this in my blink deck is that I'm afraid it will draw me too many cards and actually put me at risk. My blink deck is a Yorion, and being able to go play this. Play Yorion, blink this and both the manifest things, all 3 come back. I get 2 more manifest, draw 2 more cards, plus whatever the enter effects of the things I just blinked were, is an incredible amount of power and value. Okay, maybe I'm talking myself into it. Okay, I think I'm going to have to find a place for this, and if I deck myself, well, that's just what I get for being greedy. And my opponent can sit there and go, whew, that was scary. It's a good thing that it's so powerful that you can't stop yourself from just self-destruct. It is 5 mana, that's moderately expensive. Like, if you're doing it, if you're only expecting to do this once, then 2 2/2s and 2 cards is fine, but not the most exciting of rates. You really want to either be getting additional value from having manifested Dread, or by just looping the enchantment and or the manifests. Onwards. Simone's Hypothesis. 3 blue for an instant. You may put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, then choose odd or even. Return each creature with power of the chosen quality to its owner's hand. 0 is even. So, you play this, and you go, I want to make sure this stays, so I will change its power, and then I'll say everything with power 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc. goes back to their owner's hands, or everything with power 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 goes back to their owner's hands. An interesting partial board wipe. I am skeptical of how effective it will be, just because it is so extremely conditional on how the board looks when you're considering doing it. There exists a theoretical infinity between the discrete atoms of reality. I'm simply appropriating that infinity as storage space. It's an interesting card. It will certainly make a mess of whatever board state currently exists, but I think the main thing it's going to be useful for is just clearing up token swarms, and 5 mana for that is not ideal. Let's move on. Ancient Cellar Spawn. 1 black for a 3/3 enchantment creature horror. Each spell you cast that's a demon, horror, or nightmare costs 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast it was less than its mana value, target opponent loses life equal to the difference. So, this is asking for 2 different things. 1, that you fill your deck with demons, horrors, and nightmares, and 2, that you fill your deck with cost reduction effects or cheating ways to cast spells. Because if you cast a spell without paying its mana value, then you get to nug an opponent for the mana value of that spell. If you're just getting a 1 mana discount on something, you nug your opponent for 1 for every spell you're casting. It is a strange and interesting effect. If you're just playing it as a 3/3 mana reducer for your demons, horrors, and nightmares, then that seems quite reasonable. If you're playing it to try and take advantage of, I've got a load of things that let me cast spells for free, then that's very scary. Cracked Vents is 3 and a black for an enchantment room. When you unlock this door, this room deals 6 damage to target creature and opponent controls. You gain life equal to the excess damage dealt this way. So, 4 mana, do 6 damage to something. If you do it to a 4 power creature, 4 toughness creature, then you gain life equal to the excess damage, which would be 2. So, either kill a small thing, gain some life, or kill a big thing. And then the second half of the room is Access Maze. 5 black. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from your hand by paying life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So, 7 mana, you can cast a spell for life instead of mana. We've seen this occasionally. It continues to be extraordinarily powerful. Life is a resource after all, and in Commander we have lots of it. And I assume that the deck you're playing this in is already going to be doing like shenanigans. I did rebuild my Enchantress deck as a Runes deck. I have had this in play. It did feel pretty gross. Deluge of Doom. 2 and a black, sorcery. All creatures get -X until end of turn, where X number of card types among cards in your graveyard. So, it's a very conditional board wipe. Important to note that this will not count itself among card types in your graveyard, so you need to already have played a different sorcery if you want that to count towards the X total. A somewhat effective way to clear the board of a pile of small bodies, but requires some very specific deck building constraints if you want to get this above -4 or -5 reliably. If you're looking for a low mana cost way to get rid of a pile of small creatures, this is pretty reasonable, but this is not a reliable way to just do a full board wipe. And it's basically impossible to get to -X being bigger than 6 or 7, so it's almost certainly going to leave some large creatures flying around. Demonic Covenant. 4 black for a Kindred enchantment demon. Hey, they gave us a Kindred spell so that we can get Delirium with that. Whenever 1 or more demons you control attack a player, you draw a card and lose 1 life. I should probably explain that. Kindred looks like it ought to be a super type. It is not. It is a card type like enchantment or land or artifact. It's a weird holdover from an older set. Wizards decided that that's the way it works. That's just the way it works. Just accept that if you have this in your graveyard, it counts as 2 types towards Delirium or any other effects that care about that. Right. Demonic Covenant. Whenever 1 or more demons you control attack a player, you draw a card and lose a life. So, it doesn't matter how many demons you attack, it matters how many players you attack. For each player you are attacking with a demon, for each player you attack with 1 or more demons, you draw a card and lose a life. And at the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying, then mill 2 cards. If 2 cards that share all their card types were milled this way, sacrifice Demonic Covenant. So, if you mill 2 lands that are only lands, then this goes away. But if you mill a land and an artifact land, they do not share all their card types, this will stay. If you mill 2 creatures, this will go. If you mill a creature and an enchantment creature, this will stay. I think that makes sense. Interesting. A card that just endlessly drops out 5/5 demons is very powerful, but has very specific deck building requirement requests in order to be able to reliably do it. Very interesting card, really fun build around. Onwards, Into the Pit. 2 and a black for an enchantment. You may look at the top part of your library at any time, and you may cast spells from the top of your library by sacrificing a non-land permanent in addition to paying their other costs. Duskmourn never yields its secrets without exacting a brutal price. So, 3 mana, cast spells off the top of your library, but you have to sacrifice something as well in order to do it. Did I say earlier that getting to sacrifice things without paying mana to do so is really strong? If you are looking in a deck that wants ways to just keep sacrificing things, this is a very powerful enabler for that. If you see it in play, expect your opponent to be setting up to do some very degenerate things. This is not a card that you play if you're looking to just do fair and grindy magic. This is a card that you play if you're looking to really utilize your creatures dying or filling your graveyard. Or, that's not true, this is a card that you play if you're in a very token heavy deck, because you are absolutely happy to sacrifice your random 1/1s in order to cast real spells off the top. That is another very good place to put into the pit. Metamorphosis Fanatic. 4 black for a 4/4 human cleric with lifelink, and when it enters, return 1 target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a lifelink counter on it, and it has Miracle for 1 and a black. So, if this is the first card you draw in a turn, you pay 1 and a black to bring this into play and reanimate something. Otherwise, it's just 6 mana to get this into play and reanimate something, and the thing you reanimate gets lifelink. This is one of the most powerful enter the battlefield reanimate creatures we have ever seen in Magic. Given what your reanimating lifelink is a ridiculous bonus, the lack of a finality counter is really ridiculous. Don't get too caught up in trying to set up the miracle. This is a great rate even at 6 mana. Persistent Constrictor. 4 and a black for a 5/3 zombie snake. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, they lose a life, and you put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature they control, and it has persist so that if it dies, it will come back with a -1/-1 counter on it. This is just an incredibly slow and grindy card. If you are looking for something that will just not do anything so powerful that your opponents feel they have to deal with it, but just keep niggling away and annoying them, this is an excellent card for it. The fact that it takes 2 removal spells, unless it gets exiled, also disincentivizes your opponents from directly addressing it, and it will just steadily and slowly irk them and shrink their creatures and just make life annoying. I do not think this card is powerful. I think this card is irritating. And if you're playing something where all you want to do is irritate, this is a great choice. Polluted Cistern. 1 and a black for an enchantment room. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into your graveyard from your library, each opponent loses 1 life for each card type among those cards. So, it does nothing by itself, but sets you up for, as you mill yourself, you keep bottlenecking your opponents based on the number of different card types you're milling. And then, Dim Oubliette. 4 and a black. When you unlock this door, mill 3 cards, then return a creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield. So, 5 mana, mill 3, untargeted reanimate is very powerful. The most important bit being that this doesn't target the creature it's reanimating, so your opponents can't take you out in response to it. It's also worth noting that the mill 3 and the reanimate are all part of one ability, so you can't mill 3, then your opponents get a chance to see what you've milled, and then they hate your graveyard. They have to break your They have to break your graveyard? They have to hate your graveyard out before you mill the 3 cards, which means even if they exile your whole graveyard, you still have the chance to mill 3, hit something good, and reanimate that. If you're in the Delirium style deck, or something that really wants to just keep self-milling small amounts, like a Sidisi, this is an excellent card. Sadistic Shell Game. 4 black sorcery. Starting with the next opponent in turn order, each player chooses a creature you don't control, destroy the chosen creature. So, the person on your left looks around and goes, going to get rid of that. Then the next person goes, going to get rid of that. Then the next person goes, going to get rid of that. And you will be the last person to make a choice. So even if all of your opponents cooperate and choose the same thing, this is going to destroy 2 creatures. It is 5 mana to destroy at least 2 creatures, and at most a number of creatures equal to the number of players worth it. I don't know. This is an extremely political card. If you're into politics, this has the potential to be very good. If you don't like political cards, or don't like cards that enable huge numbers of choices, I would avoid this. This is taking longer and more time than I expected. Maybe we will not make it to drafting. We will see. Suspended Sentence. 3 and a black instant. Destroy target creature an opponent controls. That player loses 3 life. Exile Suspended Sentence with 3 time counters on it. And it has Suspend 3 for 1 and a black. So you can cast. So instead of casting it, you can put it in exile for 1 and a black. And then every turn remove a counter from it. We have seen quite a number of these powerful effects that loop every turns. If we just have another one. This is a very efficient recurring removal effect. Just every 3 turns you snipe off the best creature in play and hit their opponent. I think this is a card that is just going to be worth playing in most black decks. Just 4 mana instant speed removal isn't particularly exciting, but 4 mana instant speed removal that you can play for 2 to get it to have it at the delay and nudge your opponent for 3 and keeps looping is very good. It just makes your opponent, like, even if all you do is suspend this on turn 2, your opponents then have to make such difficult choices about how they build out their board state. And it is worth noting that this cannot target one of your things, so your opponents have to have targets for you, and if there are no targets, this spell will just fizzle and go to the graveyard. So your opponents can try and negotiate to set up where just before this would come out of suspend, they board wipe, leaving no targets. But even then, you've spent 2 or 4 mana to force your opponents to board wipe at a time that's convenient, potentially very inconvenient for them, just to restrict you, which then leaves you to, as the first one, to rebuild onto the battlefield. On to the red cards. Barb Flare Gremlin, 3 and a green. It's a 3/2 Gremlin with first strike and haste, and whenever a player taps a land for mana, if Barb Flare Gremlin is tapped, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced, then the land deals 1 damage to that player. So, when this is tapped, every land produces an extra mana and deals its opponent. Every land. Barb Flare Gremlin. 3 and a red for a 3/2 first strike haste. While it's tapped, each land produces 1 extra mana and deals 1 damage to its controller. So, if you're looking to make the game go fast, this will do it. If every land every player controls is tapping for an extra mana, everyone is going to immediately start doing much bigger things, and every land is doing 1 damage to the player, so life totals are going to start plummeting. If that's the sort of gameplay you're interested in, then enjoy Barbed Gremlin. But be aware you are giving your opponents a lot more mana than you have, and you are potentially not being the first one to take advantage of it. If you're playing this, be cautious. You are going to end the game quickly, but not necessarily in your favour. Lethal Arsonist. 2 and a red for a human wizard. It's a 1/2. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Lethal Arsonist deals damage equal to its power to that player, and it has Undying. So when it dies, it comes back with a +1/+1 counter. 1 damage every time an opponent casts a non-creature spell isn't particularly exciting, but that it comes back and deals 2 is more interesting. If you can give this equipment or enchantment or further +1/+1 counters, then it becomes quite scary for your opponents. You probably want to avoid giving it +1/+1 counters the first time it's in play, because you want the Undying to trigger so that you can get it back if there's a board wipe or removal pointed at it. But sticking a couple of enchantments or equipments on it so that your opponents are taking 4 or 5 damage for every spell they cast is certainly worth the investment. Spiked Corridor. 3 and a red for an enchantment room. When you unlock this door, create 3 1/1 red devil creature tokens with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. So 4 mana, make 3 1/1s that ping when they die. And Torture Pit. Torture Pit. 3 and a red. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage +2 instead. So, great with things like Perforos, great with the devils the first half made. Important to note that it's non-combat damage, so you need to be planning around that sort of effect. But if you're already building the mono red or red X burn damage multiplier style decks, this is probably a pretty automatic include for both halves of the card. Spiked Corridor gives you 3 blockers. Torture Pit massively increases the amount of damage you're dealing. Star Athlete. 1 red for a 3/2 human warrior with menace. Whenever it attacks, choose up to 1 target non-land permanent. Its controller may sacrifice it. If they don't, Star Athlete deals 5 damage to that player. So, you attack. You go, do you want to keep that or do you want to take 5? As usual, Punisher cards that give your opponent choices are awkward at best. 5 damage is enough that your opponents can't pay too often unless they've got life gain or other effects, but a 3/2 is pretty easily dealt with. Menace makes it a bit easier to get through. It does not have to target something that is controlled by the player defending, so this opens up a lot of politics where you go, let me attack you for 3 so that I can try and make them get rid of that really annoying permanent. It is interesting. It does have Blitz for 3 and a red, which lets you cast it from your graveyard. Not from your graveyard. I think completely the wrong mechanic. This has Blitz, 3 in a ring. You can cast it from your hand for its Blitz cost. It gains haste, and when it dies, draw a card and sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So you can surprise someone by blitzing it out of nowhere. Oh, that's why I was thinking of the graveyard, because there's a blitz commander that lets you blitz things from your graveyard. But ignore everything I've said about graveyards about this card. So you can get a one-shot with it for 4 mana, where it just comes in, goes, get rid of that, or take 5, and then it dies and draws you a card. If you can make this work, good on you. I don't think it's quite there in stats or ability. Curator Beastie. We move on to the green. 4 green for a 6/6 beast with reach. Colorless creatures you control enter with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on them, and whenever this enters or attacks, manifests Dread. So, 6 mana, 6/6 reach. When it enters, manifests Dread. That manifested creature gets 2 +1/+1 counters. So 6 mana for 10 power and toughness on the battlefield. Very reasonable, especially if you're doing shenanigans with manifest Dread. All colorless creatures are entering with 2 +1/+1 counters. So if you're in an artifact creatures deck like Mirrors, this means that all of your Orthopters, all of those are coming in with an extra 2 +1/+1 counters, which can add up very quickly, but you do have to be in green, which is not the most artifact friendly color. Powerful card if you can get a lot of value out of the additional +1/+1 counters and colorless creatures, but a very reasonable engine just by itself, in that when entering or attacking, it makes a 4. Demolisher Spore. 5 green for an enchantment creature horror. It is a 7/7 with trample and haste, and if you have Delirium, when it attacks, other attacking creatures get +4/+4 until end of turn. So, 7/7 trample haste for 7 is fine. If you have Delirium, your other attacking creatures get +4/+4 is a big boost, but it is worth noting it doesn't give them trample or menace or any other useful keyword, so it just gives big. So you need either a lot of bodies or a lot of creatures that have their own mechanics built in to help get the damage through. Also quite vulnerable to instant speed graveyard attack, because if you attack it with Delirium, this card will check. So you need to have Delirium before you attack for this to go on the stack, and then you still need to have Delirium when this ability resolves for the effect to happen. So if you attack thinking you have Delirium and then your opponent goes instant speed exile your graveyard, you may find yourself suddenly having made a very poor attack. Disorienting Choice. 3 and a green for a sorcery. For each opponent, choose up to 1 target artifact or enchantment that player controls. For each permanent chosen this way, its controller may exile it. Then, if 1 or more of the chosen permanents are still on the battlefield, you search your library for up to that many land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So, for each opponent, you choose something that you don't like. They then decide if it gets exiled, or if you get a land card. Yes, it does not say basic land, but does for opponents that don't have an artifact or enchantment for you to choose, then you don't get anything from that player. So this is difficult to play, particularly early. Interesting thing for lands decks, maybe, but again, giving your opponent's choices is rarely optimal. It requires them to have For this to be very effective, it requires each of your opponents to have an artifact or enchantment that they really don't want to get rid of. Because then the choice becomes difficult as to whether they let you get a land, not basic, any land at all, or get rid of their really valuable thing. I don't know. The potential upside of this card of getting rid of the best artifact or enchantment for each opponent, or getting the best X lands from your deck, is very high, but getting it to actually work out feels very difficult because it's so contingent on what your opponent's board states are doing. Experimental Lab. When you unlock this door, manifest Dread, then put 2+1/+1 counters and a trample counter on that creature. So when you're 4 mana, manifest Dread, put 2+1. So 4 mana gives you a card advantage 4/4 trap. Okay. And then the staff room for 2 and a green. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, turn that creature face up or put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay. So, when your creatures deal damage, that if they're face down, you can flip them or you could make them bigger. 3 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature when it deals combat damage to a player. So this will work for each creature. If you... This card is clunky, but has the potential to be strong. Requires you to be able to reliably get your creatures through the combat damage. We're going through by colour. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cards at once we finish this one left to go. If you're looking for more ways to somewhat reliably put +1/+1 counters on your creatures, then this is okay. If you're playing a lot of face down things and want a way to cheat out getting them face up, this has potential. It's an interesting and somewhat complicated card. I'm not sure how good this will end up actually being on either half. Onwards. Formless Genesis. 2 and a green for a Kindred Sorcery Shapeshifter. It has Changeling, so this card is every creature type. Create an XX colorless Shapeshifter creature token with Changeling and Deck Touch, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard. So, 3 mana, make an XX where X is the number of lands in your graveyard, and has Retrace. You may cast a card from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs. This is the sort of thing that you want to see in an Omnath Lands deck or a very heavily focused Kindred deck, especially one that has quite a lot of card draw, so that you often have lands that you're willing to throw away. Being able to pay 3 mana, discard a land, make an XX of every creature type with Death Touch is important to note. This has the in decks that care about Kindred or getting lands into your graveyard. This has the potential to be very, very powerful. I can't remember if I actually put it on the list for my wife's Omnath deck. I'll have to check that, or have to ask her to check that. Shriekwood Devourer. 5 green for a 7/5 tree folk with trample. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, untap up to X lands where X is the greatest power among those creatures. If you're really hungry for mana, and most of your mana rate, your way of getting mana is mostly lands, this is an excellent card. It is worth noting that this cares for whenever you attack, so you can play this, attack with your 5/5, untap 5 lands. even without this attacking itself. If you're being fairly aggressive and have big creatures, this is a pretty reasonable thing to consider including in a deck. It just lets you get a second use out of your lands every turn. You don't have to get through for combat damage, so if you've got creatures that you're happy to just throw away, then go for it. The bigger the creature that you're throwing around, though, the more lands you're untapping. And Ursine Monstrosity. 2 and a green for a 3/3 bear mutant. Have trample. At the beginning of combat on your turn, mill a card and choose an opponent at random. Ursine Monstrosity attacks that player this combat if able, and until end of turn, it gains indestructible and gets +1/+1 for each card type among cards in your graveyard. So, it's a 3/3 trample that attacks a random opponent indestructibly and gets +X/+X, where X is the number of different card types in your graveyard. So, it's often going to attack as if you've built the deck to fill your graveyard with different card types. This can easily be attacking as a 7/7 trample indestructible. That sounds pretty fun. Don't you think? Like, it does require your deck to be built specific with a pile of different card types, and or at least wants you to be putting cards into your graveyard. But even attacking on with a 4/4 trample indestructible is going to annoy your opponents endlessly. Important to note that the indestructible is only after the start of combat, and only during your turn, so it is vulnerable during your first main phase and during your opponent's turns. Convert to Slime. 3 black-green sorcery. Destroy up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target enchantment. So, artifact, creature, and enchantment. And then if you have Delirium, you get an XX green ooze creature token, where X is the total mana value of permanents destroyed this way. So, 5 mana, destroy 3 things. If you have Delirium, get an XX equal to the total mana value of permanents destroyed this way. If you are reliably getting Delirium, this gives you an enormous thing, but even if not, you are still getting to blow up 3 different things for 5 mana, which is quite reasonable. If you've got populate effects going on as well, this is an excellent thing to consider because you can just keep replicating that enormous slime. Again, as I've mentioned with the other sorceries that care about Delirium, you have to have Delirium not including the sorcery that this card is. It will be on the stack when it checks for Delirium, not in your graveyard. Phenomenon Investigators. 2 blue-black for 3/4 human detective. When it enters, choose Believe or Doubt. If you believe, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you create a 2/2 black horror enchantment creature token. If you doubt, at the beginning of your end step, you may return a non-land permanent you own to your hand. If you do, draw a card. So, 4 mana 3/4 that either cares about your creatures dying or lets you rebuy your permanents and draws you cards. Very weird card. Like, the first line is looking to be in something like a Grimgrin deck, where you want to sacrifice things and then get more bodies to keep sacrificing things. The doubt side, some weird blink effect or recurring value is the doubt effect is very weird. The believe effect has potential to be very strong. This is just a really weird card, and I'm really struggling to evaluate it because the 2 modes are so different from each other. And normally, the way I think about cards with choices is that I want them in a deck where either choice can be valuable depending on the board state, and I'm struggling to envision a deck where either of these are relevant. I think you are very generally playing this card because you want to choose the same mode like 90+% of the times you're playing it. Right, on to the last couple of cards. Giggling Skitterspike. 4 mana for an artifact creature toy with indestructible. Whenever it attacks or blocks, or becomes the target of a spell or ability, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent, and for 5 mana, it has Monstrosity 5, which means you can put 5+1/+1 counters on it, and it becomes monstrous. So it's 4 mana 1/1, indestructible. That when game actions that occur with it, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent, and then you can spend 5 mana to make it enormous, and then whenever game actions happen, it deals damage equal to 6 damage to each opponent each time it attacks, blocks, or becomes the target of a spell. This card is very weird and just makes life really difficult while it's on the battlefield. If you see this, exile immediately, because if your opponent can make it big or protect it, it is going to do a huge amount of damage over the course of the game. And finally, Seance Board. 2 mana artifact with Morbid, which is, at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, put a soul counter on Seance Board. And then it has tap, add X mana of any one colour, where X is the number of soul counters on Seance Board. Spend this mana only to cast instant, sorcery, demon, and spirit spells. So, important to note, it checks at the beginning of each end step, not just at the beginning of yours, so under the right circumstances, this can ramp up counters very, very quickly. Important to note, it is very restricted on what you can spend that mana on, being instant, sorceries, demons, and spirits. But if you are, say, a Demon Kindred deck or a Spirit Kindred deck, or some sort of red-blue big mana instants and sorcery spells like Mizzix or Vadric, this card is incredible. You just sit there and over the course, maybe you burn out or destroy a creature from time to time, but just over the course of the game, as people engage in combat and removing threats, this gets more and more counters and just lets you cast enormous things with a single mana rock. Very limited in where you want it, but in the decks that want it, incredibly powerful. And there we go. Everything else is reprints. We have gone through the entirety of the Duskmourn set. Hooray, hooray. I know that I said I was planning to draft, but that took longer than expected, and I do not think that a draft is reasonable given the time. Whew. That was a lot of talking. Have I enjoyed the stream? Yeah, I think so. Just bit beat now. Nearly 60, nowhere near meeting the goal for the average speed, but these heavy talking streams are never really going to be the ones to do that. See you Wednesday for second session of Hades 2, and Friday for as yet undecided first time playing some new game. Also some old game that I've just never played before. See you all later.